Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 17 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam 3rd Canto. 17th day that we have been in the 3rd Canto, and we're in chapter 6, and we just began the section, what's it called? The inconceivable nature of the Lord, which is from verse 35 to verse 40, and today we are beginning with verse 36. It is Maitreya speaking to Vidura. So here we go, verse 36. In spite of my inability, whatever I've been able to hear from the spiritual master, and whatever I could assimilate, I am now describing in glorification of the Lord by pure speech. For otherwise my power of speaking would remain unchaste. Okay, so there's a fairly substantial purport here. First paragraph, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that when we talk about purifying the conditioned soul, it means or necessitates purification of the consciousness. By the presence of consciousness, the presence of the soul is verified. As soon as consciousness leaves the body, then the body is not active any longer. So therefore consciousness is perceived by activities. And Prabhupada says, the theory put forward by empiric philosophers that consciousness can remain in an inactive state is the proof of their poor fund of knowledge. So therefore we mustn't become unchaste by stopping the activities of pure consciousness. If the activities of pure consciousness are stopped, then the conscious living entity will be engaged, otherwise means generally in something materialistic. And what's the point of that? So unless engaged, the consciousness has no standing. It can't be silent even for a moment. That's amazing, isn't it? And Prabhupada makes the point that when the body is not acting, consciousness continues to act in the form of dreams. So therefore, Prabhupada makes the point, unconsciousness is artificial, and if somehow unconsciousness is induced, it remains only for a limited time. But when the drug is finished or when we wake up, consciousness again acts earnestly. Yeah, if you've ever had operations, medical operations, which involve a complete, full anesthetic, then you would know one goes into a state, it seems, of complete unconsciousness for a while. Then on to the second paragraph. So Maitreya said that in order to avoid unchaste consciousness, he was describing the glories of the Lord, even though he felt he couldn't do that perfectly. So that's really nice. We should all describe the glories of the Lord, and we should all be honest, or at least intelligent enough to know and not be afraid to say that we can't do that perfectly. So this glorification of the Lord is not the result of research or some material scholarship, something of that sort, but It's the result of hearing submissively from the spiritual master. And then everything becomes glorious. So, and even, like Prabhupada has said so much, so many lectures, all these books, with all these purports and things like that, we can't repeat all that we've heard from the spiritual master. But as far as possible, we must narrate in an honest and straightforward way. Right, so in a sense, it doesn't matter if all this information about the Lord and his pastimes, qualities, philosophy, etc., doesn't really matter if everything's fully narrated. But the principle is we have to engage our bodily, mental, and verbal activities in that glorification. Otherwise, they'll become unchaste and impure because they will be there. So they'll become impure. So then Srila Prabhupada, about halfway through the paragraph, Prabhupada goes into an important point. The existence of the conditioned soul can be purified only by this method of engagement of the mind and speech in the service of the Lord. And the sannyasis, the Tridandi Vaishnava sannyasis, they accept, Tridandi, 3 sticks, 3 rods, and they represent the vow to engage in the service of the Lord with body, mind, and speech. And even, Prabhupada doesn't mention exactly here, but still the point is there. There's a 4th rod too, which stands for the soul. Yes. So we engage the soul, engage everything in the service of the Lord and the glorification of the Lord. So anyway, the Lord, of course, is absolute. So there's no difference between himself and his glories. So when his glories are chanted by devotees, or Prabhupada says Vaishnava sannyasis, that's as substantial as the Lord himself. He is as present in his glories as he is himself when he's, so to speak, physically present. So in this way, the devotees, and particularly Prabhupada's mentioning the Vaishnava sannyasis, they become one with him in transcendental interest, one with the Lord, although they remain eternally separate as his transcendental servants. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, this simultaneously one and different position of the devotee makes him eternally purified, and thus his life becomes a complete success. Right, so on to verse 37. The highest perfectional gain of humanity is to engage in discussions of the activities and glories of the pious actor. Such activities are so nicely arranged in writing by the greatly learned sages that the actual purpose of the ear is served just by being near them. So, of course, the pious actor is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Prabhupada says in the purport, the impersonalists, they're afraid of hearing about the pastimes, the activities of the Lord, because they think that happiness just derived from the from Brahman is the ultimate goal of life. And they think that anyone's activities, if they're your activities, my activities, or the Supreme Lord's activities, it's all mundane, even the Lord's activities. So here the idea of happiness indicated in the verse is different because it relates to the activities of the Lord, who has transcendental qualities. And the term guna vadam, meaning glorification, is significant because his qualities and activities are subject matters for the devotees, means his glorification. This is standard activity for the devotees. So, a rishi like Maitreya, Prabhupada says, a rishi like Maitreya is not at all interested in anything mundane. Therefore, he's saying here that the highest perfectional stage of transcendental realization is to discuss the Lord's activities. So, Srila Prabhupada says that Srila Jiva Goswami, therefore, concludes that topics regarding the activities of the Lord are far beyond Kaivalya happiness. Kaivalya happiness means that impersonal state of happiness, kind of liberated from material nature. Yeah, but not so much liberated, actually. So, as Maitreya says in the verse, Prabhupada says, they've been so nicely arranged in writing by the sages, all we have to do is hear them, and we become perfectly self-realized. And then the proper use of our ears and tongues are achieved. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Srimad Bhagavatam is one of such great literatures, and the highest perfectional state of life is attained simply by hearing and reciting its contents. And on to verse 38. Maitreya says, O my son, the original poet Brahma, after mature meditation for 1,000 celestial years, could know only that the glories of the Supreme Soul are inconceivable. Well, isn't that's quite something? Yeah, even after such an extremely long time, the conclusion Brahma came to is that the Lord is so amazing, so glorious, that he and his glories are just inconceivable. So Prabhupada again in the beginning, in the purport basically, talks about Dr. Frog, the froggish philosophers. Yes. I mean, there's been a few times just in the last day or two, actually, and here's a number of times. So anyway, the philosophers who are like Dr. Frog, they want to know the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Soul, through philosophy and speculation. But the devotees who do know, at least to some extent, about the Lord and his glories, they say his glories are inestimable, inconceivable. But then Dr. Frog and company, they criticize the devotees. And these froggish people, philosophers, speculators, and so on, like the frog in the well, they like to take a lot of trouble with mental speculation instead of taking instructions from devotees like Lord Brahma. So if Lord Brahma, after 1,000 celestial years of really thinking about it and meditating on it, came to the conclusion that the glories of the Lord are inconceivable, so what hope do the froggish philosophers have in their few short years of life? What hope do they have to gain some real understanding by their mental speculation? So then on to the second paragraph. Brahma Samhita says, speculators can travel at the speed of the mind for thousands of millions of years. That's a long time. But still the glories of the Lord are inconceivable. But the devotees don't waste their time with such searching. They just hear the glories of the Lord from the devotees. And of course the Lord approves of that in Bhagavad Gita chapter 9, verses 13 and 14. Mahatmanas tumam parata, daivam prakritam ashita, bhajanjananya manaso gyatva bhutadim avyayam. And then in this regard, very important statement, satatam kirtayanto mam yatantas chadradavrata namasyantas chamam bhaktya nitya yukta upasate. Right, so the idea is the pure devotees take shelter of the Paraprakriti, the superior energy, internal energy, spiritual energy, in forms like Lakshmi or Sita, Srimati Radharani, Rukmini. And in this way they become real Mahatmas. And these real Mahatmas, they don't like to indulge in mental speculation, but rather they take to devotional service without deviation. So this devotional service that they take to, the Mahatmas, it's primarily manifested. The primary process is hearing and chanting about the Lord. That gives sufficient knowledge, as if the Lord can at all be known anyway. It's only by devotional service, no other way. So, you can go on speculating and if you want and waste time, but you won't get any closer. Prabhupada says you won't be able to enter into the precincts of the Lord. So the Mahatmas, they're not concerned at all with knowing the Lord by mental speculation, because they just relish hearing about his pastimes, any pastimes, his dealing with his devotees, or his dealings with the demons. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the devotees take pleasure in both, and are happy in this life and the life after. Right, so verse 39. The wonderful potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is bewildering even to the jugglers. That potential power is unknown even to the self-sufficient Lord. So it is certainly unknown to others. Oh, that's really quite a statement isn't it? That the potency of the Lord is is bewildering even to the big philosophers, speculators, and word jugglers, people like that. And even the Lord himself doesn't know all about his power. Sure. So how could anybody else? So, right. So again, Prabhupada takes aim at the froggish philosophers and the mundane wranglers in science and mathematical calculation. They may not believe in the inconceivable potency of the Lord, but still they're sometimes puzzled by the wonderful jugglery of man and of nature. So when they hear these jugglers and magicians of this mundane world, when they hear of some amazing activities of the Lord, superhuman activities, completely in a different category altogether, and just there's no question of humans approaching these things. So they try to make the excuse or balance it, Prabhupada says, by saying it's mythology. Yeah, adjust their bewilderment. But the most wonderful puzzle, Prabhupada says, for the mundane wranglers is that while the froggish remain calculating the size of the potency of the Lord, the devotees are set free from bondage in this material world simply by appreciating the jugglery of the Lord, how he does these superhuman things. And in this way, the devotees see the wonderful dexterity which is there in all aspects of life. And an example, a banyan fruit, a small banyan fruit, Prabhupada says, has thousands of seeds, and each seed holds a banyan tree, which then again, that new tree or those new trees again hold so many seeds and more trees, and my gosh, it's amazing. So the devotees meditate on things like this, these activities of the Lord, while the mundane wranglers waste time speculating. It's fruitless, it's useless, hopeless, both in this life or in the next. So, but anyway, these wranglers, in spite of their pride, they're very proud of their speculations, but they can't appreciate the simple potency of a banyan tree. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, such speculators are poor souls, destined to remain in matter perpetually. Okay, so verse 40, which is the last verse of the chapter, of chapter 6 of the third canto. Right, so verse 40, words, mind, and ego, with their respective controlling demigods, have failed to achieve success in knowing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, we simply have to offer our respectful obeisances unto him as a matter of sanity. How's that? How is that? As a matter of sanity. Because even though these speculators and froggish philosophers, etc., they may feel they've come up with many interesting, and they may feel they've come up with many valuable ideas which they think may help people. But actually, it's insane. And how can insanity help anyone? As the famous saying goes, where ignorance is bliss, it is folly to be wise. So, of course, it can never be foolish to be wise, to be actually wise. Of course, it can never be foolish. And ignorance can never, well, it says, ignorance may be bliss in your stupidity and not understanding things much at all. You may be very happy thinking, yes, very good for me. But it's just foolishness, and it's useless, and it's detrimental, actually. So therefore, just as a matter of sanity, people should offer their obeisances to the Lord and be devotees. So, Prabhupada again talks about the froggish philosophers. The froggish calculator may raise the objection that if the absolute truth is unknowable by demigods, why should the devotees be so interested in it? The answer, it's such a good answer. The answer is that the transcendental ecstasy enjoyed by the devotees in describing the pastimes of the Lord is just so amazing, and it's completely unknown to the mental speculators. Yeah. So, of course, important point, unless you get transcendental happiness, transcendental joy in describing the pastimes of the Lord, then you'll be forced to come back to your speculations and just to material life, because you'll feel that it's all a waste of time if you're not getting some transcendental pleasure. So, Prabhupada continues, the devotees, at least they can know that the absolute truth is the Lord. And Prabhupada quotes famous Vedic verse, Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Sada Pasyanti Suraya Deviva Chakshuratatam, etc. Anyway, yeah, that if we cultivate Vedic knowledge, then we have to know that the absolute truth is Vishnu, and not some speculation on the word aham or I. So at least the devotees can know that, at the very least. But the only way to understand, the only way is through devotional service. Prabhupada quotes from Bhagavad Gita 1855, which he's mentioned on a number of occasions. Just in the last few days we've read, Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavanyaschasmi tatvataha, that only by devotional service can one understand the supreme truth. Can one know that the ultimate truth is the Lord? And then when you understand that the Lord is the ultimate truth by devotional service, then you'll know that Brahman and Paramatma are his partial features. Yes. So therefore Maitreya is confirming all of this in this verse, last verse of the chapter. And with devotion, in a mood of devotion, he himself is surrendering to the Lord. Namaha Bhagavate. He's surrendering to the Lord. So what do? We have to follow in the footsteps of the great sages and devotees like Maitreya and Vidura, like Parikshit, Shukadev Goswami, and then we have to engage in the transcendental devotional service of the Lord in order to come to know Him in His ultimate feature above Brahman and Paramatma. So there you go, devotees. That's the 6th chapter of the 3rd canto. And bear with me for a moment, and I will open up the 7th chapter. Here we go. So here we go, devotees, into the 7th chapter of the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's titled Further Inquiries by Vidura. And it's got 5 sections in it. 5 sections. So let's get started. First section is from verse 1 to verse 7, and we've called it Vidura's next 2 questions. From verse 1 to verse 7, Vidura's next 2 questions. Then the second section, from verse 8 to verse 14, Maitreya answers those questions. So that's from verse 8 to verse 14. Maitreya answers those questions, the next 2 questions. Then the third section is from verse 15 to verse 20. Vidura appreciates Maitreya's answers. That's nice. Very nice. I mean, they're very profound answers, extremely. So that's verse 15 to verse 20. Vidura appreciates Maitreya's answers. So then the 4th section, Vidura wants to know of the further aspects of creation. From verse 21 to verse 41. So that's a big 20 verse or 21 verse section. Verse 21 to verse 41, Vidura wants to know of the further aspects of creation. And finally, the 5th section is just 1 verse. It's verse 42. Maitreya prepares to respond. All right, so let us get into it. First section, Vidura's next 2 questions, verse 1 to verse 7. Let's read through just the verses initially. So verse 1, Sri Shukadev Goswami said, O king, while Maitreya, the great sage, was thus speaking, Vidura, the learned son of Dwaipaya Vyas, expressed a request in a pleasing manner by asking this question. Verse 2, Sri Vidura said, O great Brahman, since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the complete spiritual whole and is unchangeable, how is he connected with the material modes of nature and their activities? If this is his pastime, how do the activities of the unchangeable take place and exhibit qualities without the modes of nature? Verse 3, boys are enthusiastic to play with other boys or with various diversions, because they're encouraged by desire. But there's no possibility of such desire for the Lord, because he is self-satisfied and detached from everything at all times. Verse 4, by his self-sheltered potency of the three modes of material nature, the Lord has caused the creation of this universe. By her, he maintains the creation and conversely dissolves it again and again. Verse 5, the pure soul is pure consciousness and is never out of consciousness, either due to circumstances, time, situations, dreams, or other causes. How then does he become engaged in nescience? Well, that's a very good question. Okay, verse 6. The Lord, as the supersoul, is situated in every living being's heart. Why then do the living entity's activities result in misfortune and misery? That is an excellent question. And verse 7, O great and learned one, my mind is greatly illusioned by the distress of this nescience, and I therefore request you to clear it up. Verse 1 to verse 7, Vidura's next two questions. He already asked some before. So verse 1, Sri Shukadev Goswami said, O king, while Maitreya the great sage was thus speaking, Vidura, the learned son of Dwaipayan Vyas, expressed a request in a pleasing manner by asking this question. There's no purport here, so we go on to verse 2. Sri Vidura said, O great Brahman, since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the complete spiritual whole and is unchangeable, how is he connected with the material modes of nature and their activities? If this is his pastime, how do the activities of the unchangeable take place and exhibit qualities without the modes of nature? Right, so there's purport here. Prabhupada begins by pointing out, as we've read before in the previous chapter, the difference between the supersoul and the living entities is that the activities of the Lord in creating this material world, they're performed by the Lord through the agency of his multifarious energy. But the difference is the living entities are bewildered by that, by his creation and all his multifarious energies, and how they manifest in different ways under different circumstances in the material world. So therefore the Lord is the master of the energies, and the living entities are subjugated by them. So, by asking questions, Prabhupada makes the point, good point, by asking questions about transcendental activities, Vidura is clearing misconception, the misconception that when the Lord comes, he is subject to Maya like us, which he is not at all. So, and Prabhupada goes on, this idea, this wrong idea, is generally accepted by the less intelligent philosophers who think that the Lord and us are on the same level. But Prabhupada goes on that the Lord here is described in this verse as Chin Matra, or completely spiritual, He has unlimited potencies to create and manifest wonderful things, permanent and temporary. Anyway, the Lord is very expert at manifesting things, some temporary things and some things which are permanent. So this material world is the creation of his external energy, and it's temporary, sometimes manifested for a while, then dissolved, and then conserved in his own energy. This is explained in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, verse 19. That's the verse which explains how the material world is created and destroyed. But the spiritual world is the creation of his internal potency and is not temporary. It's full of transcendental knowledge, opulence, life, energy, strength, beauties, glories, etc. And such manifestations, the spiritual world, they're called nirguna, free from all modes, even free from sattva gun. It's transcendental. The spiritual realm is transcendental to sattva, and thus is unchangeable. So like this, since the Lord of such qualities, since the Supreme Lord of such eternal and unchangeable qualities is never subjugated by anything like material influence, how can his activities and form be conceived of being under the influence of Maya like we are? Isn't that a good point? It is just such a fundamental, foundational, essential point. So we go on to second paragraph, which is, it's quite a purport, this. So a juggler or a magician makes many wonderful displays. Prabhupada says he can become a cow by his magical tactics, but he's not the cow. But still the cow displayed by him is not different from him. Phew. We've heard of many magicians and clever people like that, but the magician becoming a cow, Haribol, this is higher level magic. Yeah. Prabhupada once in Vrindavan, a magician professional came and visited him and offered to give Prabhupada a free magical show. So Prabhupada agreed, and the man did different magical tricks like making some cloth come out of Prabhupada's ear, making coins disappear and then appear somewhere else, and all these sorts of things. And at the end, Prabhupada was laughing and appreciating. And at the end, the magician said, so what do you think of my magic? And Prabhupada said, it's good, it's very good. And Prabhupada said, but I know a trick you don't know. And the magician said, yes, what's that? And Prabhupada said, I know the trick by which we can make birth and death disappear. Do you know that trick? And the magician had to say, no, I don't know that trick. But that's Krishna consciousness, of course. So anyway, just like the magician becomes a cow, but he's not the cow, but still the cow is not different from him, Achintya Bheda Tattva. So Prabhupada says, similarly, the material energy is not different from him. It's not different from him, but it is not him. Achintya Bheda Tattva. So even in the material world, his transcendental knowledge and potency are always the same. just like they are in the spiritual world. So, of course, we know Bhagavad Gita chapter 4, verse 6. Lord Krishna says he comes by his internal potency. So he's never materially contaminated or changed or affected in any way by the modes. He is, it's possible to say, Prabhupada says, the Lord is sagun by his own internal potency. Sagun means with material qualities, or just qualities. He's sagun by his own internal potency, but at the same time he's nirgun, since he's not in touch with the material energy. Yes, so he's sagun by his own internal potency with qualities, but nirgun because he's not in touch with his material energy. So Prabhupada gives an example. The restrictions of the prison apply to the prisoners but not to the king. He may visit the prison sometimes. He can just walk in and walk out and change things as he likes. Yeah, he is not affected by the normal restrictions of the prison at all. So then Srila Prabhupada refers to Vishnu Purana. Vishnu Purana is where the 6 opulences of the Lord particularly are quoted in one of the verses. The opulences, the Lord says, are not different from him. The 6 opulences, knowledge, strength, opulence, power, beauty, renunciation, 6. They're all identical with the Lord. But when he displays these opulences in the material world, those opulences have no connection with the modes. And there's a word, chin matratva. Chin matratva, Prabhupada says, is the guarantee that his activities are always transcendental, even when they're displayed here in the material world. His activities are as good as him. His activities are as good as the Lord. Otherwise, liberated souls like Shukadev would not have been attracted by his activities and hearing about his activities and speaking about his activities. So Vidura's inquiry was, how can the Lord's activities be in the modes, as the people with a poor fund of knowledge think? So the material inebrities of the material qualities is due to the difference between the body and the soul, material body and the spirit soul. And therefore the conditioned soul's activities are displayed through the medium of the modes. Therefore they're perverted in appearance. But, of course, the Lord's body and soul and he himself are one and the same. So when the Lord's activities are displayed, they are non-different from him. And therefore they're worth hearing about. Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the conclusion is that persons who consider the Lord's activities material are certainly mistaken. Right, so on we go, devotees, to verse 3. Let us have a look at verse 3. Boys are enthusiastic to play with other boys or with various diversions because they're encouraged by desire. But there's no possibility of such desire for the Lord, because he is self-satisfied and detached from everything at all times. Yes, so the Lord has no material desires, because he's always self-satisfied. There's nothing that he feels he wants, of course. So Srila Prabhupada explains, since the Lord is one without a second, there's no possibility that anything besides him can exist. So he expands himself by his energies in multi-forms. Self-expansions means Vishnu Tattva, and separated expansions means us, the jivas. He expands just like fire expands by heat and light. So ultimately, since there's no other existence besides the Lord himself, his association with anything manifests his association with himself. What do you think of that? Anyway, yeah, it's true. Since there's nothing other than him, then his association with anything is a manifestation of his association with himself. So Prabhupada quotes completely Bhagavad Gita chapter 9 verse 4. Let's read it. Mayata tamidam sarvam jagadavyakta murtina matstani sarva bhutani na chaham teshvavastita. Which means, this is Prabhupada's paraphrasing of the translation here. The complete manifestation of the cosmic situation is an expansion of the Lord himself in his impersonal feature. All things are situated in him only, yet he is not in them. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, that is the opulence of the Lord's attachment and detachment. He is attached to everything, yet he is detached from all. All right, verse 4. By his self-sheltered potency of the three modes of material nature, the Lord has caused the creation of this universe. By her, he manifests the creation and conversely dissolves it again and again. Okay, let's have a look at the purport here. So this creation, what's this creation? What's it for? This creation is for the living entities who are in illusion, carried away by the illusory thought that they're one with the Lord, by imitation. So, the modes are there for just more and more bewilderment, on and on and on. There's no limit to it, really. So they think, therefore the conditioned souls, bewildered by the illusory energy, they think they are part of the material creation. They forget their spiritual identity and they become entangled in material life, completely unnecessarily. So therefore, the material world, Prabhupada explains here in the purport, the material world is not for the purpose of the Lord himself. In other words, he doesn't want to gain anything from it personally. But it's for the conditioned souls who want to be controllers of the material world due to misuse of their God-gifted, minute independence. And in this way, Prabhupada says, the conditioned souls are subjected to repeated birth and death. Verse 5, the pure soul is pure consciousness and is never out of consciousness, either due to circumstances, time, situations, dreams, or other causes. How then does he become engaged in nescience? Thank you, Vidura. What an excellent creation. What an excellent question. Yeah. So let's have a look at the purport. So our consciousness is always there, and ultimately it never changes. So when a person moves from one place to another, he knows he's changed his position. Therefore, the living entity is always present in past, present, and future. Prabhupada says, like electricity. Yeah. Even if, we ourselves move around. Yeah, but the Lord is always present. So one can remember one's past and conjecture about the future on the basis of the past experience. But certainly, one never forgets one's personal identity. So how can we forget our real identity and identify with matter? Good question. And the answer is because we're influenced by the avidya potency, ignorance potency, as Vishnu Purana and Bhagavatam say. So Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita chapter 7 verse 5, where the living entity is mentioned as Prakriti, superior energy. Vishnu Purana says that we are Parashakti, same thing. So we're part of the Lord as potency, but not as the potent. The potent can show many potencies, but the potency cannot equal the potent. And indeed, one potency may be overcome by another potency. But the potent always controls both. So therefore the jiva, the kshetragya shakti, the knower of his field, has the tendency to be overpowered by the external energy, avidya karma samgya, and in this way to be placed in awkward situations in the material energy. So the living entity, though, cannot be forgetful of his real identity unless he's influenced by the ignorance of avidya potency. And because we're prone to that influence, we can never equal the supreme potent or the potent. Verse 6, the Lord as the supersoul is situated in every living being's heart. Why then do the living entity's activities result in misfortune and misery? We'll just carry on and finish this section. So Prabhupada paraphrases this question, that why are the living entities subjected to so much misery and misfortune in spite of the Lord being within their hearts as the Supersoul? Prabhupada gives the famous example of the two birds in the tree. One is after the fruit, the other's just watching. The one after the fruit, that's us, Jiva, the individual soul, and the one just watching is the super soul. So, and Prabhupada makes an interesting point. A citizen of the state may be suffering because of a lack of state supervision. But how can he suffer from other citizens when the head of the state is personally present with him? And then another perspective, another point of view, the jiva, that's us, is one with the Lord qualitatively. So in the pure state, his knowledge can't be covered by ignorance, especially when the Lord is present there. So therefore, how does the jiva become subjected to ignorance and covered by maya? How does it happen? Excellent question. The Lord is the Father and protector of the living entities, known as Bhuta-Brit, or the maintainer of the living entities. So why then should the living entity be subjected to so much suffering and misfortune? Shouldn't be. But it's happening everywhere. So Vidura wants this question answered. And that's, it's a good point. What a good point. Excellent point. And okay, last verse in this section, verse 7. O great and learned one, my mind is greatly illusioned by the distress of this nescience, and I therefore request you to clear it up. And Srila Prabhupada gives a short purport, just one sentence. I'll just read it. Such mental bewilderment as represented here by Vidura takes place for some living entities, but not for everyone. For if everyone were bewildered, there'd be no possibility of a solution by higher personalities. So there you go, devotees. We'll carry on with verse 8, the next section, tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.